Are the judges ready?
Yeah.
Is the timer ready?
Yes.
Sure.
Is the negative team ready?
Yes.
All right. Hello and good morning. My name is Zane Kaufman and my partner is Cade Nystrom. We stand for the resolution the United States federal government should substantially curtail its domestic surveillance. When you give up your privacy, you give up your power. Thor Benson. Observation 1, definitions. The United States federal government, the government of the United States of America, and any body or entity exercising executive, legislative, judicial, regulatory, or administrative functions of the government of the United States of America. Source, law insider. Should, must, or ought used to indicate duty, propriety, or expediency. Source, dictionary.com. Substantially, by an ample or considerable amount. Source, dictionary.com. Curtail, reduce in extent or quantity, impose a restriction on. Source, Oxford Languages. Domestic, existing or occurring inside a particular country, not foreign or international. Source, Oxford Languages. Surveillance, continuous observation of a place, person, group, or ongoing activity in order to gather information. Source, dictionary.com. NSA, National Security Agency, the largest and most technologically advanced intelligence agency in the United States, tasked with the primary responsibility of collecting, analyzing, and disseminating intelligence and analyzing massive amounts of electronic and digital communications. Source, miscellaneous. Also, if any unknown acronyms are utilized during the debate, the negative team may request clarification during cross-examination. Observation 2, Palm 1. Status quo leads to a loss of trust in government and stifles creativity, innovation, and research. The use of domestic surveillance can limit the growth of the technology sector by creating a climate of distrust and making it more difficult for tech companies and startups to attract investment, hire talent, and bring new products to the market. Additionally, the use of domestic surveillance can create legal and regulatory uncertainties, making it more difficult for companies to know how to operate within the bounds of the law and protect their users' privacy. Another way that the status quo leads to the loss of trust in government is when people are concerned about government surveillance, they may be less likely to pursue new ideas or engage in open discourse. This can stifle creativity, inhibit innovation, and limit the exchange, retaliation of information and knowledge. Furthermore, the collection and storage of vast amounts of personal data can create a number of ethical and legal issues, particularly regarding data ownership, privacy, and security. 2, the status quo burdens the economy and wastes valuable resources. The deployment of extensive domestic surveillance programs can be very expensive, requiring significant investments in technology, personnel, and infrastructure. Additionally, the collection and analysis of massive amounts of data can be time-consuming and resource-intensive, diverting resources away from other critical priorities. Furthermore, the maintenance of large data sets can be costly, and the storage and protection of sensitive information can pose significant security risks. By curtailing domestic surveillance, the U.S. can help ensure that its resources are being used effectively and efficiently, and that its citizens are getting the best possible return on their tax dollars. Another way the status quo burdens the economy and wastes valuable resources, there is a growing body of evidence that suggests that traditional law enforcement and intelligence gathering methods are often more effective in preventing and addressing terrorism and other national security threats. Additionally, the use of alternative methods, such as community outreach and engagement, can be more effective in addressing the root causes of conflict and promoting stability. By curtailing domestic surveillance, the U.S. can shift its focus to more effective and sustainable approaches to addressing national security concerns, while also promoting individual rights and liberties. On 3, The status quo damages international relations and has negative impacts on diplomacy. The widespread use of domestic surveillance by the U.S. government can negatively impact its reputation as a leading advocate for human rights and democratic values around the world. This can be perceived as hypocritical and damage the U.S.'s ability to engage in constructive dialogue and work with other countries on these issues. Another way that this is how it would be, domestic surveillance can erode trust in U.S. diplomacy, making it more difficult for the U.S. to engage in positive relations with key allies and negotiate international agreements. This can also damage relationships with other countries who may view U.S. domestic surveillance as a breach of privacy and trust. 4. The status quo undermines privacy rights and leads to abuse of power and violations of civil liberties. Domestic surveillance programs in the U.S. are often conducted without effective oversight mechanisms to ensure that government officials are not violating laws and abusing their power. This includes the indiscriminate collection of vast amounts of personal data, which can be done without proper safeguards or warrants. Violating laws such as the Fourth Amendment, which protects citizens against unreasonable searches and seizures. The lack of transparency surrounding domestic surveillance programs makes it difficult to hold government officials accountable for their actions and to ensure that they are acting in accordance with the law and protecting the rights of citizens. Domestic surveillance has a suppressive effect on free expression and association as individuals become hesitant to exercise their rights, knowing that their activities may be monitored and subject to government scrutiny. This undermines the principles of democracy and free societies, where individuals are free to express their opinions and participate in political activities without fear of retaliation. The monitoring of free expression and political activity can also be seen as a violation of constitutional protections, such as the First Amendment's guarantee of freedom of speech and association. Observation 3, plan. Before we continue with our plan, here are 4 key points that must be recognized in order to achieve any positive reformation in the area of domestic surveillance. We must emphasize the need to uphold citizens' privacy rights and ensure that domestic surveillance programs do not violate the Fourth Amendment, protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. We must recognize the need for transparency and accountability in government actions, particularly concerning domestic surveillance programs. The public should be informed about the nature and extent of such programs.
Can I have a copy of the one receipt? What do you say would be a good investment to protect our country from terrorist attacks?
Could you repeat that question?
Is it a good thing to keep our country safe from terrorist attacks?
Yes, but not at the expense of civil liberties protected by the Constitution.
You stated in your Harm 1 that from keeping a close watch on America, keeping American citizens safe, that it's stifling their creativity. How exactly does that happen?
Because it can limit the growth of the technology sector by creating a climate of distrust, making it more difficult for tech companies and startups to attract investment, hire talent, and bring new products to the market.
Okay. What would you propose instead of domestic surveillance? What would you rather do to keep American citizens safe?
The Office of the Director of National Intelligence, ODNI, could be involved in implementing increased transparency and oversight measures.
Can you restate your harm too?
The status quo burdens the economy and wastes valuable resources.
Don't we waste resources on other topics less important?
No.
Wouldn't you say that we use a lot of resources to make cars and roads or building schools? Would you say that was a waste?
No.
What is your plan to keep or to lessen the surveillance of America? What would you have the government do, or what would you do?
Limitation on the use of warrantless surveillance, opposing the use of warrantless surveillance except in extreme circumstances and with unbiased supervision. Increased transparency, making the activities of the intelligence agencies more transparent to the public and providing far more congressional oversight.
What do you mean by transparent?
Are the judges ready?
Okay.
Timers?
Yes.
Affirmative team?
Yeah.
Hello and good morning. My name is Grace Jarrell, and my partner Levi Koopser and I are here for the resolution that the United States federal government should not substantially curtail its domestic surveillance. Most critics of surveillance argue about how it is an abuse of power, a violation of people's privacy, and most importantly, unconstitutional. While prominence of a surveillance claim, the benefit of surveillance is a reduction in the probability of a high-cost event such as terrorism. Government surveillance programs, when conducted in controlled situations, are closely audited by independent organizations and do not directly harm innocent citizens, especially when they benefit the safety of the general public. Surveillance, by definition, is the act of carefully watching someone or something, especially in order to prevent or detect a crime. Harm 1. It is one of the three primary methods of collecting information to keep people safe. Mark Tennyson from the Washington Post argues that there is only 3 ways that the government can collect data that is needed to keep everyone in the country safe. Officials can obtain this information by questioning subjects, infiltrating enemy groups, or using intelligence resources to monitor communications. Even though this effort can track cell phone calls, text messages, and emails of millions of people who are in no fact a threat to the country, but this argument is that the government surveillance is necessary to detect any association to international terrorism, which will save lives. Harm 2. Surveillance does not create a threat of physical harm on its own. When the government is performing surveillance over video, communication lines, and internet resources, then there is no one being physically harmed by these activities. You can install trackers on trackers on vehicles that might invade some of your privacy, but you will not be actually attacked on your person. Because the goal of this work is to discover criminal activities, many people believe that the ends justify the means when it comes to keeping everyone safe. Harm 3. Government surveillance makes the country safer. When citizens are monitored 24 hours a day, they feel safer and more protected than when they are not. Take, for example, when we are at home with children, our family, versus when they are left unsupervised. The time parents are present are the safest times for the children being at home, almost like surveillance. Harm 4. It causes no harms to individuals. Yes, and yet it makes the country safer. Sounds like a win-win, doesn't it? Surveillance does not harm anyone. A car tracker installed in your vehicle will not harm you, nor will a bug installed on your phone. These methods may, however, work in the favor of the government and will lead to discovery of criminal activity. Harm 4. Government surveillance deters criminals and terrorists. When a person is under the surveillance of the government, they tend to be on their best behavior. If terrorists discover that they have no chance of hiding from the long arm of the law, they will be demoralized and deterred in their plans for evil. Conclusion: we need to be kept safe. We should not be naive. We should not be naive. The world is not a safe place. Terrorist organizations such as the so-called Islamic State aim to cause massive loss of life, and they are not restrained by ethical or moral construction. Foreign governments have demonstrated their willingness to deploy deadly weapons, including radiological and nerve agents, in order to target dissidents and political opponents within our borders. Drug cartels have access to the military-grade arsenals and are willing to go through brutal lengths to enforce control. If a state cannot guarantee national security, then it has failed in its most important mission, keeping us safe. The government should have access to all the tools that it needs in order to prevent terrorism, violent crime, and foreign insurgency. There should be a due process and significant political justice, judicial oversight. But after reasonable criteria have been met, it makes absolutely no sense to deliberately tie the hand of the government and diminish its ability to protect us. If we want security, we need to let our intelligence services do what they do best. There is a time and place for government surveillance, where the use is authorized to keep someone safe. Whenever there is a threat to human life that is predictable and imminent, then this technology can help save lives. Representative Silver Reyes of Texas, chairman of the House of Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, once said, "We are a strong nation. We cannot allow ourselves to be scared into suspending the Constitution. If we do that, we might as well call the terrorists and tell them that they have won." End quote. I am now ready for cross-examination.
Can you name these independent organizations that you mentioned before you went on to the harms?
Independent organizations, can you please elaborate on that, on where you're talking?
Before the harms. You mentioned independent organizations before the harms.
Yep, when they are conducted in controlled situations closely. There's a website, I forgot the name of it right now. But I have the name over in my research over there, and I will give it to you after. But they make sure that the government surveillance stays secure, and so that no outsiders can find this information, and that we can only use this information for when we need to look into possible crime, possible terrorist attacks, all that stuff.
Okay. So you mentioned in one of your that you could also possibly be tracking like millions of regular citizens who have no intention of committing crime. Isn't tracking millions of civilized citizens, isn't tracking their personal mobile phones, to put it hypothetically, swatting the fly with a sledgehammer?
Swatting the fly with, well, tracking people is just one way that we have to keep our country safe, and it's just the world that we live in right now. With uncertainty around every corner, there is no way that we can trust anybody and anything. And this information is not being used to harm anybody. If you're not doing anything wrong, then then there's no reason to be looking into. If there's nothing to hide, then there's no reason that we shouldn't be looking. Otherwise, there could be cartels, illegal, everything. It's just the world that we live in right now.
Okay, couldn't these tracking tactics be used punitively?
No, it's pretty secure. We have all of our information. It's so that only law enforcement officers and judges, and just it's secure. You have to have you have to go through the judges to look to see all this information.
Okay. You admit that you were tracking everything from everyone, basically. Okay, there is a time and place, but it's not now. As you said, the programs must be open, and they currently are not.
And that is one thing that we are willing to work for. We have to make our country safer. So we can do anything that is, we can make it open. We can do anything to make our country safe. That is the one thing that I would like to see as an improvement.
Are the judges ready? Timer and negative team.
Sure.
Hello and good morning. My name is Kate Nystrom and my partner is Aiden Kaufman. We stand for in the resolution the United States federal government should substantially curtail its domestic surveillance. The way things are supposed to work is that we're supposed to know virtually everything about what they, the government, do. That's why they're called public servants. They're supposed to know virtually nothing about what we do. That's why we're called private citizens. Glenn Greenwald. The negative team asked, why should people care about domestic surveillance if they truly have nothing to hide? In the words of Edward Snowden, arguing that you don't care about the right to privacy because you have nothing to hide is no different than saying you don't care about free speech because you have nothing to say. Also, study after study has shown that human behavior changes when we know you're being watched. Under observation, we act less free, which means we effectively are less free. In our 1AC, we didn't finish reading our plan, so I will now tell you what we as the affirmative team propose to do to fix domestic surveillance. Policies. Based on the crucial points mentioned in the 1AC, we as the affirmative team propose and endorse reformational policies that would implement the following. 1. Limitation on the use of warrantless surveillance. 2. Increased transparency. 3. Reforms to the FISA Act. 4. Data protection. 5. Limiting data retention. 6. Protecting privacy rights. And 7. Independent oversight. The agencies would include the Department of Justice, the ODNI, the NSA, the FBI, Congressional Oversight Committees, and independent oversight agencies or commissions. It would be enforced by most, if not all, of the aforementioned agencies, in addition to the executive branch and courts. And the funding would come from congressional appropriation, reallocation of existing funds, and or new revenue sources. Also, one additional note is that if it would be helpful to do so, our policies could be implemented gradually over time with funding increasing as needed. Advantages to our plan would include it would strengthen the privacy rights of citizens, protect their Fourth Amendment protection against unreasonable searches and seizures, and ensure government accountability and transparency. 2. Limiting domestic surveillance would reduce the potential for government overreach and abuse of power, prevent violations of other civil liberties, and combat corruption. It would also promote trust in government and foster a sense of security among marginalized communities. 3. It would reducing domestic surveillance programs would lower the economic cost and save valuable resources that could be used for other pressing issues. It would also stimulate creativity, innovation, and research, and encourage the development of new technologies and innovations. 4. Curtailing domestic surveillance would improve international relations and demonstrate a respect for human rights. This would also result in more favorable trade agreements and other advantages relating to foreign affairs in general. 5. By curtailing domestic surveillance, the U.S. would embrace a more balanced approach to national security that takes into account the harm it can cause to citizens and society, helping to build a safer and more secure country for all, which is what the negative team said they wanted. Being a patriot doesn't mean prioritizing service to the government above all else. Being a patriot means knowing when to protect your country, knowing when to protect your constitution, knowing when to protect your countrymen from the violations and encroachments of adversaries. And those adversaries don't have to be foreign countries. As the affirmative team, we encourage you, the judges, to be a patriot and support our side of the debate. The negative team said that domestic surveillance can help prevent and solve crimes, making communities safer. But actually, there's little evidence to support the claim that domestic surveillance is effective in preventing and solving crimes. In some cases, it may actually divert resources and attention away from more effective methods of crime prevention. Additionally, the use of domestic surveillance can undermine trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve, reducing cooperation and making it harder to prevent and solve crimes. They also said that the government has a responsibility to protect its citizens from harm, and surveillance can be an important tool in achieving that goal. But in fact, the government also has a responsibility to protect the privacy rights of its citizens, and domestic surveillance can have significant negative impact on privacy rights. In some cases, domestic surveillance has been used to target political dissidents and other minority groups, violating their civil liberties. The negative team also said that We need all of the information so we can catch any little thing that related to a terrorist, to like find the needle in the haystack. But I agree with Edward Snowden in that I would argue that simply using the term haystack is misleading, because it's a haystack of human lives. It's all of the private records of the most intimate activities throughout our lives that are aggregated, compiled, and stored for increasing frequencies of time. It may be that by seizing all of the records of our private activities, by watching everywhere we go, by watching everything we do, and by monitoring every person we meet, by analyzing every word we say, and by weighting and passing judgment over every association we make in person we love, that we could uncover a terrorist plot, or we could discover more criminals. But is that the kind of society you want to live in? That is the definition of a security state. As stated in our Harm 1, the status quo leads to a loss of trust in government and stifles creativity, innovation, and research. The negative team completely failed to address any of our harms and provide counter arguments for any of them, and even gave an affirmative argument in their own 1NC. Another source supporting our Harm 1 is that when citizens feel their privacy rights are being violated, it can erode their trust in government and institutions. This can make it more difficult for the government to effectively address important social and political issues, as citizens are less likely to cooperate or provide critical information. Furthermore, the perception that the government is overstepping its bounds can create a negative image of the U.S. on the international stage, damaging its relationships with other countries and weakening its ability to promote democratic values abroad, which would make our country less safe overall. And the negative team said they wanted a safer country. Our Harm 2 said the status quo burdens the economy and wastes valuable resources. The negative team also failed to address this, and a further, more information supporting this is that the collection and storage of vast amounts of personal data can create significant security risks, potentially exposing sensitive information to hackers and other malicious actors. By curtailing domestic surveillance, the U.S. can better allocate resources and minimize security risks, promoting the overall welfare, prosperity, and safety of its citizens, which is what the negative team said they wanted. Our Harm 3, the status quo damages international relations and has negative impact on diplomacy. The use of domestic surveillance can encourage other countries to engage in similar activities, leading to a global escalation of surveillance and the erosion of privacy rights. This can have a negative impact on the stability of the international system and create challenges for the U.S. in terms of maintaining its reputation and influence. This would also make the U.S. more susceptible to attack by other countries, making the country less safe. Our Harm 4, which was also not addressed by the negative team, is that the status quo undermines the privacy rights of citizens and leads to abuse of power and violations of civil liberties. Domestic surveillance often involves unjustified intrusions into the private lives of citizens, collecting personal information that may be used against them in ways that violate their right to privacy. The negative team agreed that the government is collecting information from nearly everyone. This includes the monitoring of online activity, phone conversations, email, and other forms of communications without sufficient cause or due process, violating privacy laws such as the Electronic Communications Privacy Act and the FISA Act. This creates an environment of distrust and erodes the fundamental rights and freedoms of citizens.
You can finish your
Okay.
sentence. Right, that was mid.
Yeah. So given the obvious harm the status quo causes and the achievability of numerous solutions, my partner and I unwaveringly endorse the resolution. The United States federal government should substantially curtail its domestic surveillance, and I hope you will do the same. Thank you for listening. I'm now ready for cross-examination.
Are the judges ready? Timer? Affirmative team?
Yes.
What study were you talking about with people being watched, how they acted differently in the beginning of your 2AC?
Study after study has shown that human behavior changes when we know we're being watched. So under observation, we act less free, which means we effectively are less free.
Do you have any exact studies or any dates for these studies?
I do not have a specific source for that, but in general, all our arguments and sources are kind of an amalgamation of credible privacy officials and whatnot.
Okay, do you have like a piece of paper for those, for all your sources?
No.
Okay. What
You
system?
also didn't have sources either.
We had sources, but you never really asked.
But you said you were going to give them to us and you never did.
This is not our idea. This is not your examination. What systems would you go through for your plan?
Hmm?
What systems would you go through for your plan?
Like the agencies that would implement it?
Yes.
the Department of Justice, Office of the Director of National Intelligence, National Security Agency, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Congressional Oversight Committees, and independent oversight agencies or commissions.
All right. And approximately how long will this plan take to be in action?
It could go into effect within the next couple weeks if people actually cared enough.
Okay. How would you replace the domestic surveillance to protect our American citizens from outside terrorists and inside terrorists?
I'm not saying we should get rid of domestic surveillance entirely. The resolution is that we should substantially curtail it. So how we're currently running domestic surveillance is actually harming citizens more than it's protecting them. So we could still keep some amount of it and just track certain people that have a record, or not keeping the data, like shortening data retention as we had in our plan. But we're not saying that we need to entirely get rid of domestic surveillance.
All right. And how does harmless surveillance cause physical harm?
Physical harm?
Physical harm.
How does the absence of domestic surveillance cause physical harm?
I'm the one answering the questions here.
Okay, it doesn't.
Okay. And where did you get your definition for the surveillance in the end of harm 2?
The definition for surveillance?
It was domestic. It was I forgot what it was
Harm
called.
to
End of harm 2.
I don't remember anything about that, but we defined surveillance at the beginning as the continuous observation of a place, person, or group, or ongoing activity in order to gather information.
Okay. And how, as in your 1AC, how is protecting our American citizens wasting resources?
Our entire harm 2 talked about that. It's very expensive and requires significant investments and is extremely inefficient.
So it is not an investment that you're willing to take to protect our American citizens.
Wait. You don't need help right now. The judge is ready.
Timer?
Yeah.
Negative team?
Not really.
Too bad. Good morning. My partner Grace Darrell and I, Leva Kupser, are against the resolution. The United States should substantially curtail from the domestic surveillance. Quote, any society that would give up a little bit of liberty to gain a little surveillance will deserve neither and lose both. Benjamin Franklin. Observation 1, definitions. I accept our 1NC's definitions. Observation 2, harms. Harm 1. Domestic surveillance can be an efficient and effective way to gather intelligence to prevent threats, such as the affirmative team has stated. The use of domestic surveillance can lead to a significant number of false purposes and misidentifications, reducing the efficiency and effectiveness of intelligence gathered efforts. Additionally, the significant privacy violations associated with domestic surveillance can undermine public trust and reduce the effectiveness of intelligence gathered efforts. The use of domestic surveillance allows the government to respond quickly to threats, increasing its ability to protect our country. The speed of which the government can respond to threats is not necessarily treated to the level of domestic surveillance. Other methods, such as monitoring facilities, financial transactions, and interpreting communications, can provide the government with with the information that we need to respond quickly to threats without interfering with privacy rights. Harm 2. Harm 2. There may not be an alternate method to gather the same information that domestic surveillance provides. There are other methods, such as monitoring financial transactions and interpreting communications through phone or text or email or whatever it may be, that can provide the government with much of the same information it would need without interfering with privacy rights, such as watching the conversations between two gang members or something like that. Additionally, some information can be obtained through intelligence shared with foreign governments and international organizations. Domestic surveillance can be more cost-free and cost-effective than other methods of finding information. The cost-effectiveness of efficiency of the domestic surveillance are debatable, and given the significant privacy violations and potential for false positives and misidentifications. Additionally, the high cost of maintaining and updating domestic surveillance programs can outweigh any potential cost savings. Harm 3, domestic surveillance programs must comply with the law and have proper oversight to ensure that they are not being abused. Compliance with the law and proper oversight is not enough to protect privacy rights, and laws and religions can change over time and may not be adequate to the face of rapidly evolving technology. Additionally, government agencies have been known to abuse their powers even when operating with the bounds of law. The government is accountable for the people and must ensure that its actions are transparent in compliance with the law. The government may not always be fully transparent in its actions and may use legal loopholes to classify information to avoid public scrutiny. Additionally, the government's accountability to the people is limited by the lack of transparency and oversight in domestic surveillance programs, making it difficult for citizens to hold the government accountable for the abuses of its power. Observation 3, conclusion. I think it is important to understand that you can't have 100% security and then have 100% privacy and zero inefficiencies. We're going to have to make some choices as a society to further secure our rights and freedom and justice. Barak haba. In conclusion, my partner, Grace Starr, and I urge the judges to vote against the resolution. Thank you. I'm now ready for cross-examination.
The judge's ready, the timer, and you're ready. Could you clarify the resolution you stated at the beginning?
The United States should substantially curtail, or this is the resolution we're voting against, it, that the United States should substantially curtail from domestic surveillance.
Okay.
We vote against that.
Yeah. You said you accept the 1NC's definitions. Your 1NC didn't present any definitions. Could you give me, or tell me what those definitions are?
The 1NC, right? Or the 1AC, sorry.
Okay, so you accepted our definitions.
Yes.
Okay. Could you repeat your harm 1?
Domestic surveillance can be efficient and effective way to gather intelligence to prevent threats.
You said, did you say somewhere in that harm that it does not, collecting information, like doesn't interfere with something? Like it doesn't interfere with privacy rights or security or something like that?
No. Other methods such as monitoring financial transactions and
Oh yeah, so like
interpreting conversations can provide the government with the information it needs to respond quickly to the threats without infringing on privacy rights.
Okay. How would looking at people's financial transactions and that other stuff you said not interfere with, or infringe on privacy rights?
Well, depending on what it is, if two gang members went and stole vehicles or money or credit cards, then we can track those numbers that they're using to find them, to track them down. And then we can also use surveillance to find their location.
Okay. What if, you went to the store or you were suddenly rich and bought a car and went and bought another stuff? Well, the government could track you, right? Doesn't that infringe on your privacy rights? Because you have done nothing wrong?
In a way.
Okay. Could you repeat the title of your harm to?
There may not be an alternative, there may not be alternative methods to gather the same information that domestic surveillance provides.
Is all the information that domestic surveillance provides even necessary?
Yes.
Why?
Like I said, we need to know what people are doing in America to keep innocent civilians safe from the threat of.
Okay. Do you agree with what I mentioned earlier, that the current domestic surveillance laws just actually interferes, or it makes the country less safe? Do you agree with what I said about how the status quo with domestic surveillance makes the country less safe?
No.
No further questions, I guess.